Okay, for today's video, we have properties of real numbers. Um, we're going to start with the commutative property of, and there's one for addition and multiplication. Um, so for addition, a plus b equals b plus a. Basically means that when you're adding two numbers, it doesn't matter which number comes first. You can add them in any order. For multiplication, same thing. When you're multiplying two numbers, it doesn't matter the order. So 2 times 3 is 6, but 3 times 2 is also 6. The associative property of addition has to do with when you're adding 3 or more things. Um, so in the first side, or the left side, if you do a plus b, then add c, it would be the same as adding b plus c and then adding a. If you look at the example, 5 plus 17 would be 22. You add 6, you get 28. But if you added 17 plus 6 first, you would get 23, then add 5 and still get 28. That also works for multiplication, where if you're multiplying 3 or more numbers, the associative property would tell us that it doesn't matter which order that you multiply them in. Okay. The identity property, again, you have an addition and a multiplication one. These are slightly different, though. The addition property of identity, or the additive identity, means any number plus 0 would equal that number. So 5 plus 0 equals 5. The multiplicative property of 0, the multiplicative identity is multiplying a number by 1 equals that number. So for instance, 2 times 1 equals 2. Then we have the 0 property of multiplication. This one's pretty obvious. Any number times 0 equals 0. So 2.35 times 0 is going to equal 0. And then we have the multiplication property of negative 1, where a number times negative 1 will equal the opposite of that number. So for instance, 8 times negative 1 is negative 8. But if we start with a negative number to begin with, then the answer is not negative, the answer is the opposite. So we would get positive, as in negative 7 times negative 1 equals 7. Okay, so on this next slide, we want to try using the properties of addition to add up these three numbers. So pretend you were going out to the movies and you bought a movie ticket for $7.75, and then you bought, I don't know, some licorice for $2.40, and maybe some popcorn for $1.25. And you want to make sure that you do some quick addition in your head to make sure they're charging you properly, or to see if you have enough money. So how could you do that in a way to make it easy to do in your head? So pause it, give it a shot. So the associative property is going to tell us, instead of, actually let me switch that around. The commutative property is going to tell us that we can switch the 2.4 and the 1.25. So I'm going to start there. Then the associative property tells us that we can either do 7.75 plus 1.25 or 1.25 plus 2.4. So I'm going to start with this one here. Because of the 75 cents and the 25 cents is going to equal $1. So that's nice. So we have 775 and 125 is going to be $9 even. And then adding the 240 is going to be very simple. So that's $11.40. Now I'm showing you this on paper and writing it out, and so it seems like it will take a long time, but as you practice moving these numbers around, it'll be very quick and it'll be mental. So these are good properties to use for mental math. Also in this section, we need to talk about simplifying expressions, which we talked about a bit last year. For number 1, the associative property of multiplication will tell us that we can multiply the 4 times the 8, which will give us 32. and then we multiply the n after. Since we don't know what n is, there's nothing we can do there. We just say we're going to multiply by n. For number 2, the associative property tells us that we can change those parentheses because we can't add 5x and 3 because they're not like terms. So we can't do anything there. But what we could do is we can change those parentheses. This is going to require a little extra work. And like I said, we could pretty much do this in our heads, but just to use the proper or the correct properties, I'll just show you how that works. So we can do that, and then we can use the commutative property to flip those around. Then we can use the associative to do this one first. And then we have 10 plus 5x. And just like in the beginning of the problem where we couldn't add 3 and 5x, we cannot add 10 and 5x. So we have to keep those separate. So we can say 10 plus 5x. And then the fraction with variables in it, this doesn't really go along with the properties that we talked about, but we will need to learn how to simplify fractions. So I use what I call the accordion method here, and I just kind of split up the pieces. And if there's a variable that has no variable to go with it, I just put a 1 under there or on top, depending on where I am. Now we can simplify these each individually. So 8 over 2 becomes, oops, I didn't really get that, becomes 4 over 1. X divided by x is 1 over 1, and y over 1 stays as y over 1. Now we push the accordion back together, and on top we have a 4 and this 1 here. So 4 times 1 times y, so we get 4y. And on the bottom we have a 1 over here, and this little 1 here, and 1. So everything's a 1, so 4y over 1. Now if we have a 1 on the bottom, that just means dividing by 1, so we don't need to do that. Just leave it as 4y. Alright, that is it for this video.